Welcome to The Firing Line with Philip Naiman. The Firing Line radio show is brought to you by Turner's Outdoorsman, IndustryGreetings.com, CCW Safe, Cutting Edge Bullets, Vortex Optics, Vortex, the Force of Optics, and by Philip Naiman and Cornerstone Christian Wealth Management.
There's a really funny clip, but you can't hear it on Zoom. I don't know. We'll do sock puppets in between.
Good. Bad. I'm the guy with the gun.
And now your host, Philip Naiman.
Hello, folks. Welcome to another special edition, and one of my favorite editions so far, of Firing Line Radio Show. This is Philip Naiman. I hope you're having a great Saturday out there, wherever you are. This show is going to be a little bit different than our basic, tactics and guns and all the other fun stuff in life. This show is probably gonna be a little bit deeper than, well, it's obviously deeper than my level, but I'm gonna try and pick up the show quality for the listeners out there. So I have a very special guest. Her name is Meyli Chapin. Meyli, if you aren't familiar with her story, back in 2019 is a survivor of a horrific terrorist attack, and she's gone on to conquer things since then. So we're going to go through all of her story. It's an amazing story. Lots of different elements came to play. Obviously, she's here on the show, so spoiler alert, right? She made it through there, which is we're all happy to see. But let me welcome her to the show. Meyli, how are you?
I'm doing well, hanging in there, busy. How are you?
I'm glad you're busy. I'm doing nothing. We're just hanging out on a Saturday and just I'm bored. So I do shows because I'm bored. But on your website, people want to get a hold of you, Meyli Chapin, MAYLICHAPIN.com. Best way to.
It's MEYLI, but it's pronounced like an A.
Folks, I wrote that down so I would pronounce it correctly, but it is MEYLI. MEYLI. I knew I was going to screw it up. I knew it. I do it every time. So you have reached the pinnacle of all my guests whose names I have destroyed. Anyway, MEYLI Chapin, CHAPIN dot, I spelled the dot right, com, COM. Tell us a little bit about your background, right? Just an all-American girl growing up in Ohio. What you got?
Yeah, I guess you could call me that. I think quintessentially, probably at the most core level, I'm a nerd. I would say that's the theme that's cut through my whole life. I really love to learn. I really love to read. I've always loved to read. When I was a kid, my punishment would be to take my books away and make me go play outside. So I've just always loved books, loved learning, loved to sort of experience new worlds that way, I guess, if that makes sense. And
favorite authors?
Gosh, I love everyone. People always ask me that.
I love everyone.
I think for a long time, my favorite book was The Count of Monte Cristo when I was growing up. So I loved adventure. But I've read just about everything. I love poetry as well, fiction, nonfiction, historical fiction. I'll read it all.
Okay. So obviously, as you say, nerd / student. So college was?
Yeah, I went to Stanford when I graduated high school, which was wild because I grew up in a small town in Ohio, the same town my dad spent his whole life in. And so it was the first time that I moved away and did something really different and met a lot of really different people who had really different lives than me. And it was a really special experience. Plus, you can't really beat California.
Well, especially Palo Alto, Atherton. I mean, crying out loud, it's some of the prettiest places on earth.
Yeah.
If you have the money to live there, it's a really great place.
Yeah, it's a great place to be as a college student. Stanford housed me so that I could be in such a beautiful area.
That's even better. So you studied obviously technology. Is that was your?
I didn't. Yeah, people always think that. I studied public policy, which is very similar to the economics major, but with more of an applied focus. So here's how we can apply econ to try to alter public policy in the U.S., which is not at all what I've done professionally, but it was a very interesting major.
Okay, and then so out of college, you got your job at?
I went to Bain Consulting after Stanford, which is
like
where you get to be a nerd and get paid to be a nerd. So that was fun.
So, and that they're still doing investment management, right? Bain?
Yeah, they do. The Bain and Company, which is who I worked for, does consulting for corporations.
Yeah, Mitt Romney's old company. We won't bring that up. In case you didn't know that. Anyway, so you're doing consulting there, but eventually you ended up with an overseas gig with Google.
Yeah, I was hired by Google headquarters in Mountain View, California. So I spent my time with them initially, but I did travel a lot for all of my roles at Google, really. So I was in and out of Asia and Europe fairly regularly for different roles because a lot of what I was doing for Google was research based. And so I love to sit down with actual end users and ask them how they think about technology and how they use it and interface with it and feel about it.
So you actually would fly to these different countries just to talk to end users of Google.
Yeah, yeah. That's what happens when you work for such a global company. And I think that sometimes we make the mistake in the US assuming that everyone thinks the way that we do.
Oh,
And so
right.
sometimes we would have issues. We'd put out a product and it wouldn't really get any traction in certain countries. And we had trouble figuring out why. It's really popular in the US. Why isn't it getting traction in these other places? And so,
Which of that, in business school, the quintessential example was the Chevy Nova, right?
yes,
Never
yeah,
sold in South America.
interesting.
Says no go. Yeah. So you were going out to find out why local users weren't using Google more.
Mhm. Sometimes, or how they felt about it, or if there were burgeoning negative feelings, things like that.
What were the negative feelings about Google, the overlords?
Yeah, it was tricky. So that was really something that we were seeing in the US, and we wanted to know if that was being replicated in other countries. So people were starting to have this just really negative attachment to their devices. They felt addicted to them, like they couldn't get off of them even if they wanted to. And so that was starting to combine into this negative feeling. I think about technology generally. We saw it about Facebook, about Google, about Twitter, about mobile games. So it was this big push in the US all at once that we wanted to know if other countries were feeling.
And this was actually pre-pandemic, right?
That was pre-pandemic. Yeah, exactly. My time at Google actually ultimately ended just before the pandemic. So
Okay. So you're in Kenya, right? Typically one of the more stable countries in Africa.
certainly.
Of course, that's a sliding scale. So one of the more, and honestly, I've really never seen anything good come from Kenya, but we'll just leave that there. These are the jokes, folks. You got to stick with me here. So you're in Kenya. Google sends you there. Now, there's companies like Global Rescue that do security services for executives. I mean, I use Global Rescue when I travel for medical evac, or if I'm going someplace that's maybe not stable, like, I don't know, Sonora, Mexico. I want to make sure I have an exit route. Google did all this in-house, correct?
Yes.
So tell us a little bit about the background of if you're setting up to do an international trip in a place that may or may not be stable, what kind of preparation do they do?
So the thing about Nairobi specifically at that time, as you mentioned, I know it is a sliding scale, but it was classified internally as low risk at that time. Google has an office in Nairobi, Kenya, and it just wasn't considered to be one of the mid or high level risk countries at that time. So really, there was not much of a process that was initiated. I
Had you been to other
didn't.
countries that weighed higher on the scale of?
Yeah, I don't know about risk level, but I had been to China and we received a briefing for that about, how to comport ourselves and make sure that we were complying with local laws and regulations. So I just wasn't sure,
Did they say don't bring any marijuana to Russia? Was that on the list at all?
I never went to Russia with Google, so I can't say for sure. But generally, they had good recommendations for wherever we were going. And so I wasn't sure how to think about Nairobi and how to, decide for myself whether it was safe or not.
Your first trip to Africa?
That was, my first trip to Africa.
Has it been your last trip to Africa?
It has been my last trip to Africa. You got to listen the first time. I don't feel like I don't have the best luck there. So, but so I reached out to them and asked them if there was anything that I needed to know, and they provided me a short briefing document that said, biggest risk to Google employees there is like petty theft or traffic accidents, and keep your wits about you. Don't walk down dark alleys by yourself at night. And then they did advise me to switch my hotel reservations. So I had booked the Kempinski, and they said that the Dusit D2 had better security, more setback from the road. And so I did switch my hotel reservation.
So you ended up in the wrong hotel on the recommendations of security. Well, 50-50. Folks, this is Philip Neiman. I'm here with Meyli Chapin. MEYLICHAPIN.com is how you get a hold of her. She's written a book called Terrorist Attack Girl. We're going to talk more about that when we come back right after this. So that was our super secret commercial break there.
That's great. I felt like that was a perfect cliffhanger. Nailed it.
Well, I remember I was listening to one of your interviews, and that's what they said. It's like, oh no, this one's way better. It's not off the road, so no car bombers, or oh well.
Yeah.
Everything works in theory.
Yeah, it's a coin toss sometimes, right? It's hard.
Yep. All right, Dan, we're ready.
Here we go. This portion of the firing line is brought to you by Turner's Outdoorsman.
All right, you primitive screwheads, listen up. See this? This is my boomstick.
Hey, folks, welcome back to Boomstick Radio. Philip Neiman here. Get our podcasts at firinglineradio.com. Firinglineradio.com. Actually, we just redid the website. So on our vendors page, we have their discount codes right next to their links. And I don't know why it took me 10 years to do that, but it's there now. So we're here to help, here to save you a lot of money, cutting edge, all the great companies at CCW Safe that sponsor us. They have great discount codes. You save money with them. They support the show. And then I can have fantastic guests like Meyli Chapin on. So Meyli, we're coming back to reset the story here for those of you just tuning in. Google employee, young American gal, first trip to Africa, security force says who work for Google. And I'm sure that these are guys who've been in the field a while. They come in and they say, look, this is a better hotel to stay at. It's more of a plaza. You're off the street. Less chance of car bombs or bad things happening. So stay over here at the D2 hotel. And that's where you are. How long had you been in Africa before this all happened?
Barely any time. My whole itinerary for Nairobi was only 2.5 days. So I had just gotten there.
It takes 2.5 days to fly there.
Oh, I was coming from India. I was coming from Mumbai. So
it takes 2 days to fly to India.
It does take a long time to fly to India. Yeah.
Yeah, I've been to India. So you're there for some small meetings. You get into town about 3:00 in the afternoon, right?
Yeah, so it was my second day there. I had jet lag, got up at something like 3 a.m., 4 a.m., went to the gym, did some interviews, and then was back in the hotel by 3 p.m.
Okay. And roughly 3 p.m., what happened?
Yeah, it's so funny because I was not supposed to be there. Actually, I missed some interviews that afternoon, and traffic was so bad that I said, don't worry about it. I'll just grab a nap, which I did not. I went up to my room and I sort of packed my things. I was supposed to head out the next day. And as I crawled into my bed to take a nap, I never have been able to find words for this. The complex exploded. There was an explosion so loud that my ears were ringing, and it was so close that I was screaming just instinctually. So I wasn't sure at the time what had happened, but I know now that the suicide bomber had detonated in the courtyard.
So four terrorists, Islamic terrorists from Somalia, entered Kenya. They did not apply for firearm permits, which is the Kenyan law. They brought tons of hand grenades, AK-47s. There was 5 of them or six of them.
There were 5, 1 bomber,
5.
4 gunmen.
Yeah. So one guy drew the short stick, blew himself up outside of a cafe, killing many people. And your first thing is you jump up out of bed. Were your windows broken at this time? Did the blast break?
No, actually, the windows, I was on the third floor, my windows held.
Which was interesting too, because you said it's an English count, so it's actually fourth floor if you were in America. So you were too high to jump out of a window to escape.
Yes.
And that whole bed sheet rope thing doesn't really work.
Considered that too. I mean, it's also, you stop considering jumping out the window when the gunshots are coming from all around you, right?
You're jumping right into gunfire.
Exactly.
Yeah. So your instinct was what happened, run to the window. And
Yeah, it's funny all of the things you look back on and feel differently about, but I had no training, right? I had no instinct. I literally just thought I had better figure out what happened, right? I just, it was pure, I mean, I just ran for the window wondering what is going on. And I wrenched the curtains open and I looked down and I tried really hard to, I think, deny what I was seeing. It was like, it just wouldn't process. But you could see remnants, pieces of the suicide bomber, and blood spatter and smoke, and it was, yeah, a scene of absolute devastation. It was like a nightmare.
so disbelievable. You were thinking like, are they filming a movie down there? Right.
Yeah, I literally, yes, it was
can't process the horror.
Yeah, it was the only thing my brain could compare it to. My brain kept saying, you know, this must be some sort of set, because that's the only way I've ever seen anything that looks this horrific.
Yeah. Evil exists, folks. So at that point, then you shut your windows or shut your curtains, right? And this is the beginning of a siege on the building that lasted for you 17 hours.
Yeah, I was in there 17 hours, and it actually did go on after that, closer to 20 hours. But I closed my curtains because I saw men with AK-47s.
You actually saw them.
Yeah, I did. And that was the first time my brain thought, oh, maybe I shouldn't be standing here with the curtains wide open. I think I was still trying to process that I was in a violent crime. You know, you don't think of yourself as a target naturally. So it was very strange.
Right. I mean, you know, Ohio, Stanford, you know, you don't deal with this, right? This is something that's on a whole different level in the world, and being blessed as an American, for the most part, we don't even have an idea this stuff goes on.
Exactly.
And this was not the
we
first
are lucky that I can't imagine living like that all the time. It was unbearably terrifying. I wish I had a better word.
So now the siege begins, and folks, you can get this from Terrorist Attack Girl. Terrorist Attack Girl is her book. She's written it. Buy the book, get the whole story. We're just going to give you a couple of highlights on this. Lowlights for Meyli, but highlights for this interview. You weren't traveling with anybody else, right? From Google?
No one else from Google. There were some folks that were from a third-party research agency who very thankfully did make it to the interviews on time. So they were not in the hotel during the attack, thank goodness.
So you were literally there alone, third world country, terrace down below, stuck on a fourth floor, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and you heard gunshots continually, right?
Gunshots, explosions. I remember the car alarms. They blew up some cars along the way, and then the fire alarms started in the building. So it was just a never-ending
pandemonium of noise.
Yeah, pandemonium.
Unbelievable. And again, these guys were armed with AK-47s and grenades. They had tons of grenades, from my understanding.
Yes.
And those are those other explosions going off. They were tossing grenades everywhere. In our next segment, we'll talk about how some of them were corrected for their behavior. But we want to talk right now about what were you thinking alone as the sun's going down in your hotel room, if you can?
Yeah. I was thinking, I genuinely remember thinking that I was glad that I was alone. There is a type of fear that you just can't wish on your loved ones, right? Sure, people always think it would be nice to have someone with you to be comforted, but I think I would have broken just thinking about what I was going through happening to someone else that I know or love. So I was glad to be alone. And I just thought it was hopeless anyway, right? I didn't need comfort. There was nothing that anyone could do. I knew that I was going to die. I accepted that I was going to die. And I just, it literally, I was just waiting. I was just waiting. And I remember just hoping over and over and over and over. I hope it's quick. I hope I die quickly. I hope I die quickly.
Being a young lady with Islamic terrorists, you know that the bad things are more likely to happen than not, right? If you were taken alive.
Yeah.
So you even
And
had
I
a plan for
remember
that.
thinking, yeah, I did. Yeah, I remember thinking that is something I can't let happen. Like I can't let this go on for years. I can't let my family wonder about me. I'm not going to be in some video being beheaded. Like if I'm going to die, I'm going to die right here on this bathroom floor. And I guess I didn't feel like when I die, I'm going to die right here on this bathroom floor. And so I think this is what you were alluding to. I had a glass water bottle that I shattered actually on accident. I knocked it over, which was terrifying because I was trying so hard to be silent. And in that moment, I looked down at these shattered pieces of glass and I thought, that's a weapon. It's a weapon that I didn't have anything. It's so hard to explain what it's like to feel that powerless. You're literally sitting on a bathroom floor waiting to be executed.
Wow. Folks, I want to take a break right here. I'm sorry. It's just the way the timing worked out on that. We're going to come right back here with Meyli Chapin, and Terrorist Attack Girl is her book. Powerful things that she's gone through, and she wants to help other people in PTSD situations. So folks, we'll be right back after this.
So sorry, I didn't see that one.
Sorry? No.
I said, sorry, I didn't see that chat.
No, that's why we're not live. We can move things around. All right, Dan. Is this hard for you every time?
This portion of the firing line is brought to you by CC. What were you saying?
I just asked her a question.
Oh, okay. Should I go now?
Yes, you may.
This portion of the firing line is brought to you by CCW Safe by Philip Naiman and Cornerstone Christian Wealth Management.
Spartans, let me done your work. Come and get them.
Folks, welcome back to the show here. This is Philip Naiman with Meyli Chapin. We're talking about a terrorist attack she lived through, and her book is Terrorist Attack Girl. You can get it at meylichapin.com, meylichapin.com. She actually does speaking engagements, PTSD support for other people, stress workshops. And well, this is something that, as we just talked about offline here, this is something that's not easy to talk about for her, even 3 years down the road. She was alone. Terrorist attack happened in her bathroom, thinking that it's going to happen. She's going to pass away or be murdered, I should say. And she has to deal with this. Now, she's here on this show because God intervened and that didn't happen. So you were in contact, I think, with Google and the US Embassy by phone at this time?
Yes, I was. And I just want to say it is hard to talk about, but I feel so lucky to get to talk about it because I find that every time I share my story, someone hears it and reaches out and says, I know what that feels like. And I find so much community that way. It makes me feel so much less alone. And I hope other people feel that too. So I always feel really honored to get to share my story. So thanks for having me. Yes, I was in touch with them and they were kind of keeping me updated, but it was an ever evolving situation, right? Constantly changing. And so the information that I was getting changed a lot. So they'd say, people are at your door to save you. Go unbarricade your door, open it up. They should be there. Are they knocking? And that would happen roughly every hour for 17 hours. So it was tough to keep thinking, it's over, and then hear more gunshots and no one's at the door.
So this started at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, 3:30 in the afternoon. 17 hours later, if I can do my math right, it comes to about 8:30 in the morning before it was all done. So the majority of your time was in total darkness.
Yeah, total darkness. And I think that's hard for people to comprehend as well, because we couldn't turn any lights on, right? You didn't want to show that anyone was inhabiting the room that you were in. So my lights were off. I was trying to cover the light that comes from my cell phone. So
With the bathroom
truly,
door shut. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So true darkness that way. Yeah.
Yeah. That's terrifying. On the ground, this segment, our third segment, we always start with Leonidas talking about the Persians. Persians are yelling, lay down your weapons. Leonidas says, Persians, come and get them, right? Well, by the grace of God, somebody did that. And what I mean is there was a gentleman, I'm gonna call him a gentleman, a warrior gentleman. His name was Christian Craighead. He happened to be with the SAS, the 22nd Regiment of the SAS. He happened to be in Kenya training the locals at that time. This siege went on for 17 hours. The locals, my understanding is they pretty much stayed on the outside and let it happen, kind of like that Broward County school situation where all the cops stayed on the outside, right? They weren't running to face anything. This guy, Christian Craighead, gets a phone call, is alerted to the situation, happens to have his kit in the trunk of his car. What a blessing. Puts on a balaclava, his plate carriers, his Glock and his M4, and goes in his words, and he's written a book, hopefully be released soon. He was alone, he went in alone because there was nobody else. He did it because that's what he does. And he went in and was pulling people out. Now he's at a big danger there for friendly fire, because again, you got these Kenyan people on the outside. They don't know who's who. Probably they knew that if there's a white guy pulling people out, he wasn't that bad, but you don't know. He was at risk of friendly fire. He's at risk of the terrorists, but hundreds of people he was able to evacuate. It's almost like the situation we saw in Afghanistan where, Chad Robichaud and Tim Kennedy and their crew brought 17,000 people out when the U.S. State Department was, who knows what they were doing, but it wasn't right. But this man went in, risked his own life, and he's got his own story, but you were able to meet him later, I think a year later or so. Can you just tell us about that, what you spoke about with him and what he said?
Yeah, it was really extraordinary. I had a really hard time staying in hotels after this event, but I met him a year later in a hotel, so it's like everything came full circle in this one moment. And I had heard about him online, sort of the same way that everyone had, right? Saw the photos of him in his balaclava, and I had become quite a fan, obviously. But it was strange that there was this man who had risked his life and everything, put everything on the line for people he didn't know. And I was one of those people. And so I was really thrilled to get to meet him, but I was also really sort of speechless. I couldn't figure out what to say. And so I wrote him this long letter the night before, and I said, I hope that every day of your life from now on, you remember that you didn't just save my life, you saved the life of my brother's sister, my parents' daughter, right? They have those things because of what you did that day. And then you multiply that by 700, right? Because I'm just one of the people that he saved.
700 was the number?
It was over 700, yeah. It's usually the figure that they cite. And so, yeah, and I just didn't know how to convey that. How do you thank a complete stranger for saving everything that matters to you? But he is, I thought warrior gentleman was a very adequate description. He is incredibly humble. He's incredibly kind. And he was almost confused that I was thanking him so profusely. He seemed to think of it very much as like his duty. I think he says sometimes that his whole life led up to that day. And so it's a beautiful thing. I think about the fact that he joined the military the year I was born. And so I feel like we were on these parallel paths for so long. And then it all sort of came to a head that day. But yeah, we talked about both sides of it. We talked about how the event still haunts us both. Um, he's he is such an incredible warrior that I think he feels like he could have done even better. I don't know how that's possible. And then we talked about I don't know, I certainly talked about how standing between good and evil that day, you can't only walk away thinking about evil. You really walk away thinking about the goodness in people too, and that he gave that to me, and that I think that's why I've been able to deal with it as well overall. At times not so well, but overall I've dealt with it, and I think that's because it wasn't just a dark day. He made it so that it was also something really beautiful.
Very, very important. You know, one of the other things you had mentioned, maybe we can bring that up now, is you were escorted out of the building, right? By, was it Marines from the U.S. Embassy or?
That's my understanding, more or less. They only said embassy. I'm not exactly sure what their titles were.
Yeah, so maybe some 3-letter State Department employees or U.S. Marine. But so at the end of your 17 hours, right? There's a knock at the door, and it's kind of funny the way this, the verbiage. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's so funny, right? Because whenever I talk about this experience, I spend this time reliving this dread and this terror. But as soon as we get to this part of the story, like, this is the happiest moment of my life. So it's fun to put myself back in that moment. So yeah, there was a knock at my door. There's this really calm voice, American accent, saying my name. You know, hey Meyli. It's like nothing was happening.
And he pronounced it correctly.
He did. Hey Meyli, we're at the door. You know, can you come open the door? Are you okay? Can you hear us? And I went sort of running for the door, and I was still on the phone with Google security, and they said, hang on, you know, you have to verify these people's identity. You don't want to just throw your door open. And so I was like, okay. Can you tell me who you're with? Was my question through the door. And I think one of them, just without thinking about it, said, just off the cuff, back through the door, he said, don't worry about it, kind of harshly that way. And it was funny because I was truly reaching for the doorknob, and he said that, and I kind of pulled my hand back. And then I knew it was fine. I realized now, I recognized one of the voices on the other side of the door. He had been the man who was in contact with me for a long time, every few hours, keeping me updated from inside of the hotel. So he said through the door, we're really sorry about that, Meyli. We're from the U.S. Embassy. And
he smacked his buddy.
Come on. That's what it sounded like. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. You know, so, and then they escorted you out, right? And we're going to talk in our last segment here about the healing process from all of this and what you're doing now. Folks, Philip Naiman, Firing Line Radio Show. Hope you're having a great day out here. We're pleased to spend it with Meyli and finish the story here. We'll be right back after this. He has to reset the segments. That's the dead air in between.
These short segments are nice.
Here we go. This portion of the firing line is brought to you by Vortex Optics. Vortex, the force of optics.
Yes. Great hunter. Yes. Yes. Fine figure of a man. Yes. 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 That is all you need to know for now.
I wanted to see your reaction on that intro there. Folks, Philip Naiman, Firing Line Radio Show, here with Meyli. And we're talking about what's going on here, or what went on, right? In 2019, she was a victim of a terrorist attack. I think you might be on mute there, Meyli. She was a victim of a terrorist attack. She survived, right? In the meantime, there was an SAS soldier came in, took out a couple of terrorists, saved over 700 people. The embassy squad got there, got her out of this building. While she was in the building, you know, night came and lasted way too long. Her windows were shot out. There's just grenades and terror happening all over the place. And now she's at the embassy getting debriefed and, fly home and have a latte and no big deal, right? What happens after all this? So tell us how to put your life back together after something like this.
I think it's such an apt question because I didn't even realize that I would need to ask myself that question. I mean, you joke about going home and getting a latte. I was in the embassy sending emails to my coworkers, hey, I might be out for a day or two. Please make sure these projects have coverage. And so it was sort of that shock. I thought that would be it. I thought I'd get on a plane and go home and have a latte and go back to work. But I found that I was really struggling. I was having these really vivid nightmares, really vivid flashbacks. I started having panic attacks for the first time in my life. And I came to the conclusion of what you just said, that I was going to have to figure out a way to put my life back together after everything that I had known had changed, right? I didn't feel inherently safe. I didn't feel like I understood humanity in some ways. I didn't know what my priorities were in light of that event.
So you're a victim of Islamic terrorism. Had anything like that ever crossed your mind before? I mean,
No.
you were very young when 2000, when 9/11 happened. So you were what, 8 or something like that?
Yeah.
So,
grade, yeah.
So that's not really something that affects you as an adult. So you've never seen anything like this before. And then now you look around and you see it everywhere, right?
Unfortunately, yeah. I think that, and I do want to take, you said 9/11 specifically, I do want to take a second and say that we did lose an American in the Deuce at D2 that day who was a 9/11 survivor, Jason Spindler. So
and he was killed by the suicide bomber.
Yes, he was. And I always try to remember and honor him. It was so close to being all of us. That's the difference Christian Craig had made, was luckily some of us were able to walk out. Yes, 9/11, I was very young. I think that the whole thing is summed up in this idea of taking things for granted. I think I took my safety for granted. I think I took the people who make me safe on a daily basis for granted. And I think about that every day now. I think about why I can stay in hotels in the US and feel safe, right? And who's putting what on the line for that, right? There are people every day putting their lives on the line to protect my freedom. People I don't know who will walk into a hotel to save my life on the other side of the planet. And so I think it
from
really
another country.
Yes, exactly. And I think it really came down to that. I took my safety and my freedom for granted, and I will never make that mistake again, I hope.
So at this point, I mean, those are great points. You decided, hey, I've been through this. I'm okay. I'm coming to this point, but there's others who aren't. What are you doing to help them?
Yeah, I was lucky. I feel like I didn't know what to do, but I had people around me who knew what to do and got me the right resources and treatment. And so I became very stuck on the fact that so many people didn't have that, right? So I built an app. It's called Trauma Brace, and it has evidence-based protocols that help people who are struggling in the aftermath of a trauma.
Can you say that again? Trauma Brace is an app, and it is.
Yeah. It helps people who are struggling after a traumatic event work through evidence-based pieces of homework to help them process the trauma.
So help me, what is evidence-based pieces of homework?
It just means that everything that you'll be shown in the app has decades of evidence, clinical evidence to support its efficacy. So it's not experimental. We aren't making anything up. It's literally the same protocol that is followed in therapy on a daily basis.
So, we've had Mike Glover on. He's involved with Warriors Heart Healing. There are several groups out there that are dealing with PTSD. Obviously, soldiers have had many issues with this because, you go up from Ohio, right? You were somebody from the football team joins the Marines and they go see the suicide bombers in Afghanistan and all this other stuff. They're dealing with the same things. And so PTSD has been a real issue because just like they said before, we didn't welcome back the Vietnam vets correctly. Now, okay, that was before my time. I'm not that old, but at the same thing, there's still a section of people who have been in this war against Islamic terrorism, and they're still fighting all that because the evil was so pronounced. It's something that it's on a different level from where we work. So our society works together because we all follow the same, for the most part, all of us follow the same rules. They have a whole different base where if you follow those rules, you're just supposed to be a victim, and it's so hard to get an idea for that. So to see that evil and then to help other people, I think is important. You're actually doing stress workshops, right? So how does somebody,
Yeah.
and your speaking engagements, tell us about that.
Yeah, I think my favorite speaking engagements that I get to do are with law enforcement and military personnel.
And Southern California radio shows.
And other than Southern California radio shows.
Oh,
exactly.
yes.
Just because it's so personally meaningful to me, right? I get to thank them for what they do and remind them why they do what they do. And they're often experiencing PTSD or post-traumatic stress in some manner as well. And so getting to talk to them about that is really meaningful. And then we do stress workshops because I think that stress is a spectrum and it can range all the way up to PTSD or PTS, but it starts smaller and more locally and acutely than that. And so trying to help people manage the physiological fallout of all kinds of stress has really become sort of my passion, I think.
Well, it's definitely a calling. I mean, you have the intellectual side to delve into that, and then the real life, and then your speaking abilities are obviously quite on point. But stress, as you say, it's a spectrum, but all those spectrums affect your health.
Exactly.
Your cortisol levels, and you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, that is the best summary I think I could ever have someone say. That's exactly right. When I look back at my life, I realized that even at Bain, even at Google, when I wasn't sleeping, wasn't exercising, wasn't caring for my mental health, I was already experiencing some of the effects of stress physiologically, as you just said. I wasn't sleeping well. And then if you magnify that times 100, that's sort of what PTSD felt like. But that's exactly the point, is we can help people manage wherever they are on the spectrum to back it down a little bit to increase overall health. And I think that's a really beautiful thing that gets overlooked all the time.
So I'm asking one more question. Well, if I have time, I might ask two more questions, but you found yourself at a point feeling helpless, evil outside the door, helpless. Have you done anything, training, protocols for yourself where you're saying, I'm no longer going to be on the victim side of this equation?
Oh yeah, I love that question. Yes, I think I never want to feel that again. There is a powerlessness in that helplessness that was just as much a part of what traumatized me that day as the evil, right? The fact that I could not do anything for myself was horrific. And so, yeah, I took a lot of self-defense classes afterward. I learned all about firearms for the first time in my life, something that I had never really thought I would have an interest in. I used to say I'd never have a firearm in my home, which I think was a bit of a naive take. And it was really empowering, I think, to learn all about firearms, how to handle them, how to clean them, how to be incredibly safe and aware of the power that they present, and feel like I could wield them to protect myself if need be. I really stand by that. It's been, empowering, I think, is really the word.
I think you actually even have a Zev Christian Craighead model. Is that correct?
I may or may not be in possession of one of those. It's a pretty fantastic firearm. I have certainly fired one, and it's like nothing else I've ever shot.
So, folks, I want to thank my guest, Meyli Chapin, MEYLICHAPIN.com is how you get a hold of her. Hire her for your next corporate event. This is a great thing to do. Get her book, Terrorist Attack Girl. We're trying to support her. She's obviously, Second Amendment supporter here. And you just heard about that. Training empowers yourself for safety. And so I'm glad you're here on the show. I want to thank you for your time. God bless you.